In this section, we show you how to define functions using Bash. Now, thus far, we've created our simple Hello World program where we've shown you some of the techniques that Bash understands and accepts in a pretty loose fashion. Functions allow us to neaten up or tidy up the code and to store functional areas or related areas and group them so that we can cross-reference them appropriately. Additionally, it allows us to turn on and off sections. So if you're able to use functions to group logical sections of your code, you can enable, disable them on the fly without impacting the entire code. Let's show you how that works. So we'll open a shell and we're going to define a new script besides Hello World, which of course still exists. We'll create a new file. We'll call this guy function test.shell. Recall, it's not executable by default when creating it because of the UMask. Let's modify it using Pico, and we'll need to set it up as a typical script which contains the shebang header, bin bash. We'll put our customary end and some comments. Comments never hurt, so people understand. The more you practice it, even though we're just testing here. This information never hurts. You never know who's going to read it. And purpose. Another good piece of information is a separate line for like modified and even created. This we didn't show you last time, but you'll see it when you observe other scripts, etc. Purpose, function definition. Alright, so let's jump in. So we want to do a few things in our script. We're not sure yet, but if you have things in mind, tasks in mind, you want to organize them into functions. Let's create a function, our very first function, which will do nothing other than echo the current date. Now this function will only echo the date, not the time. We'll define the function by actually calling it function, by specifying the word function, and we give the function a name. We'll call this function showDate. And we'll use open paren, close paren. And all you need to do after is just open brace and then close brace, and everything contained within the braces pertains to the function named showDate. Now there are a few ways you can alter or specify or declare a function. So you can declare a function in a few ways. If you maintain the open paren, close paren, the parentheses set, then you don't need the keyword function. That's if you maintain the open and close parentheses. You can just simply type showDate or the function name, open paren, close paren, and the Bash interpreter realizes that it's a function and defines it as such. Or you can specify the keyword function, the name of the function, and omit the open or sets of parentheses, open and closed parentheses. It's common for scripts to include exactly what you see here. The keyword function, the name, and the parentheses set so that subsequent readers, including the author of the script, is not confused when they read it. So let's do something within this section of the code. We'll tab just to create some space so it's visually appealing, or you could use spacebar if you'd like. And we'll actually execute the date command. We'll use plus so that we can invoke the formatting features inherent within the date command. And we'll use %F. This will simply output today's date, not the time. We have a function showDate. Now let's exit the script and attempt to source it just to show you what happens. If we're to source function test, you notice you get no output. And that's because we have yet to cross-reference the function. We haven't called it. Somewhere below the definition of the function, we need to actually call the function. This is where we'll call the function by name, and we don't need to specify the parentheses set or anything. Just call it by its name, and Bash will execute it accordingly. Now this is where it gets really neat, because as we develop multiple functions, we can alter the order of the functions, of the execution of the functions, and we can enable, disable the execution of functions. So we can alter order as well as enable, disable execution. Let's return to the shell and see what's happening here. We'll source function test, and function test will now print today's date with no time. So the first function, our very first function, which is called showDate, executes the date command with the %f option. If you run date, it echoes the date. If you run date with help, you'll see the various formatting that's permitted. Among them, %f, uppercase F, is allowed, and that prints year, month, date, and you need to prefix any of the outputted variables with a plus sign to invoke the formatting. Excellent. So we now have one function working. Let's move on to more functions. Let's pico it, and we'll define a new function. Simple, but simple, but you need to understand the concept. This one we'll call not show date, show time. And we'll open braces, close braces, and we'll do something here. The same date command, but with different parameters or with a different argument. %r. %r will show the time. And again, if we don't call show time, it won't run. Let's show you that. We'll source it, and we have to source it because we haven't flagged the script executable. Notice only the date is being echoed. So let's go back in and we'll call it. Now we'll call show time right below show date, and both will execute. Excellent. Now let's show you how to reorder it. And if you don't believe the date that's actually being echoed or time, just type date. You'll see everything should line up. Let's change the execution order. We'll use Control K. Since we're in Pico, Control K will actually cut the line, and above show date we'll use Control U to paste it, and then we'll remove the space separator, the new line separator. Now time will be echoed before date, whereas before date was echoed before time. Let's source it, and here we have the time first, then the date. So now you should be a pro at actually defining functions. Of course, you want to do more complex things, but you always start with the simple building blocks. Doesn't make sense to start off complicated. Start with very simple tasks, and then the rest just becomes reading skills to understand the complexity of other code. Now we can do other things here, such as a function for mailing the administrator. So let's define a function, and we'll call this function mail admin. And this particular function will actually mail, we'll set a subject. Subject will be successful execution of script. If we want, we could use command substitution to echo the name. And we'll send it, of course, to the root user. So this would actually just kick off a mail. We could also cat something into it, or echo, perhaps, success, and pipe it into the mail command and have it send it out to root. And then below show time and show date, the very last function that's called is mail admin. And we can enable or disable this particular function if we'd like. So we can attempt to run this, and at the end of the script, I mean, if the script has made it this far, in other words, then it's successful. Of course, later on we show you conditions, and conditions would make this much more logical, because we could then say if error level, do X, Y, and Z. So we'll echo the word, or the string, success, into the input stream of mail with a subject and send it off to root. Let's source it, and it's run. And if we were to run mut and look for the new message, it's here with the subject, and you can see the N indicating it's a new message. Successful execution of script. The word success was actually sent to the input stream of the mail command, and we can go back to modifying function test to do other things. Now the mail sequence or the mail function can be last. We can do other things in here. Anything that comes to mind. Like if you recall the hello world script, we echoed some predefined variables. Now another thing to note, you can define variables within functions and they'll be treated as local variables, and you can also define variables outside of the functions, and those variables become available within each function. So in other words, the difference between global and local variables. So define as many functions as you want, and then you can enable or disable pieces. Let's call this one getUserInfo. This will just run the read command, and this will read in, let's say, two variables, first name, and of course we need to put an echo line so that the user knows what to do. First name, last name. But let's put on top of that echo, please enter your first name and last name. And then a new line will be created, or will be created, and waiting for the user to enter that data. Then of course we need to echo it. Hello, first name, last name. So we have a function called, and actually we plural the functions, we need to remove the S. We have a function called getUserInfo. We can determine when and if we want to run it, perhaps before we mail. Now, the order of execution does not need to match the order in which the functions are defined, but what is important is that the functions are actually called after definition. So we've defined the functions and then we call them. Unlike most robust programming languages where you can call the functions up top in the code and define them later on. So let's call getUserInfo, and this will at least get our information. If you wanted to clear the screen, that'll work out as well. So let's have it do a clear screen right here. And remember, bash processes line by line, and that's how it works. It executes line by line. So it clears, it echoes, reads, echoes, you name it. Let's Control X, return to the prompt, and source the function test again. Excellent. So now it needs first name and last name. We'll put Dean Davis. And it says, hello, Dean Davis. And it made it to the last function, which was to kick off a message. Here's a new one, successful execution of script. And I'll just delete it. We don't need to read it. Excellent. Let's pico it and see what else is going on. So we have show date, show time. Of course, we can combine show date and show time. They aren't drastically different. getUserInfo, mail admin. Let's show you how to turn off a piece. You simply comment it out, and a mail will not be generated in this case. We'll source it and show you. Hello, Dean Davis. We'll run mutt. We have no new messages because we've commented out that particular function, so it isn't running. So that's the power of functions, and this is a very basic, easy way to show you how it works. You define the function, and then you call it. Let's show you what I meant before about being able to declare the function in a different fashion. You can, for example, just define or declare your function without the keyword function. Mail admin, open paren, close paren will suffice, and we'll enable mail admin. Let's source it, give it the info it needs. Hello, Dean Davis, and we'll find mutt in the history. We now have a new message. So you see, all this works pretty cleanly. It's not a big deal. It works very well, and you should be able to do it too. It's quite easy to define functions within your scripts, and once again, the difference between more complex scripts is that in more complex scripts there's much more logic to parse through, but nonetheless the concepts remain the same. And the last thing we may want to do with this particular script, if we lsl function test.sh, is to actually make it executable by the root user. Now, we've shown you how to make it user executable. Let's show you how to make it executable by anyone on the system. Simply do a +x function test, and that does it. Now, if we LSL it again, anyone can execute this particular file. Of course, only root can write to the file, but everyone else can execute it. So we have a simple function, and again, we did in the hello world a sourcing of an additional file. Anything you can do from one file, you can do in this particular file where we've define functions, and pretty much almost anything you can do at the command line. So that's how you define functions. Functions allow you to organize logical pieces of your code. Now, if you're using scripts in production environments, which many companies do on Unix and Linux across the board, then it's suggested that you actually develop the components of your shell script within functions. So if there are any problems, you can troubleshoot quite easily. You can debug quite easily by enabling or disabling functions versus actually parsing through the entire code stream and commenting out sections individually. So functions just make it much more flexible, much more easier to deal with. So now you understand functions. Of course, the material gets tougher, but I'm trying to explain it to you in as simple form as possible. So I hope you enjoy.